September 14th, 2024, 6:15 a.m. The alarm didn't wake Jackson Reeves. He was already awake. He had been awake for an hour, staring at the water-stained ceiling of room 12 at the Mercer Motor Lodge. The same room he'd rented for 6 months straight. The same ceiling he studied every morning while the sun crawled across West Virginia like it was afraid of what it might find. Jack sat up slowly, his back complaining the way it always did since the mining accident in '09. 48 years old, and his body kept a detailed record of every mistake, every fall, every time he'd chosen pride over safety. The photograph sat on the nightstand where it always sat. A young woman, 22 years old, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, blue work uniform with a name tag that read, Lily. She was smiling, but if you knew her, really knew her, you could see the worry behind her eyes, the weight she carried even then. Jax picked up the photograph with hands that had held it so many times the edges were starting to soften. "Morning, Lily," he said to the empty room. 7 years, 2,555 days since he'd last heard her voice. Not that he was counting, except he was. Every single one. He set the photo down gently, stood, and walked to the small bathroom. The mirror showed him what it always showed him. A face that had seen too much. A scar above his left eyebrow from a bar fight he barely remembered. Gray threading through his beard. Eyes that used to be warm, now cold and watchful. The Hell's Angels cut hung on the back of the door. Leather worn soft from years of road and weather. The patches told a story to anyone who knew how to read them. But the most important story, the one that mattered, wasn't written anywhere visible. It was written in the lines around his eyes, in the set of his jaw, in the way he moved through the world now, always watching, always waiting for the moment when someone would need someone to stand. Because 7 years ago, when Lily needed someone to stand, he wasn't there. He wouldn't make that mistake again. 6:45 a.m. The Crossroads Diner sat at the intersection of Route 52 and County Road 9, a relic from the 1950s that had somehow survived the slow death of small-town America. Chrome and red vinyl, and a neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. The kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the past was always present. Jax pulled his Harley into the gravel parking lot, the engine's rumble fading to silence. 3 other vehicles, an old Ford pickup with a cracked windshield, a Toyota that had seen better decades, and a black BMW that didn't belong, parked crooked across 2 spaces like the world was its personal parking lot. He noted it, filed it away, kept walking. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, the same bell that had chimed every morning for 6 months. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and frying bacon, and something underneath that, something older. The scent of a place where people came not because the food was good, but because it was familiar. Table 12 waited for him in the back corner. The last table. The one where you could see everything, but nobody really saw you. Jax sat with his back to the wall, a habit from years of knowing that the world could turn on you in a heartbeat. His eyes scanned the room out of instinct, the mechanics of survival. 4 customers scattered across the booths. Old men mostly, nursing coffee and yesterday's regrets. A young couple in the corner, not talking, just existing in the same space and calling it a relationship. Everyone locked in their own private quiet. And her. Dorothy Brennan moved between the tables like water, finding its path. 62 years old, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a brown uniform that had been washed so many times, the color had faded to something closer to memory than fabric. Jax had been watching her for 6 months, not in a way that was wrong, in a way that was necessary. Because when you've lost someone to silence, when you've buried someone who screamed and nobody listened, you develop a sense for it. You can see it in people. The ones who've learned to make themselves small. The ones who apologize for taking up space. The ones who move through the world like they're afraid of being noticed. Dorothy Brennan moved exactly like his sister used to move. She approached his table with a pot of coffee, her smile practiced and tired. "Morning, Mr. Reeves," she said softly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades speaking and not being heard. "The usual?" "Yes, ma'am," Jax replied. "Thank you." She poured his coffee with steady hands, the steam rising between them like all the words neither of them would say. Then she pulled out her order pad, even though they both knew she didn't need it. She'd memorized his order the second week, but the ritual mattered, the small dignities of service. "Black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast," she said, writing it down anyway. "That's right. Be right out." She turned to leave, and Jax noticed what he noticed every morning. The way her shoulders curved slightly forward. The way she held the coffee pot like it was heavier than it should be. The way she glanced at the clock on the wall with the expression of someone measuring out their life in shift increments. 38 years she'd worked here. He'd learned that from Frank Dalton, the diner's owner, during one of their brief conversations. 38 years of pouring coffee and clearing plates and being invisible to people who never bothered to see her. Just like Lily had been invisible to the people who should have protected her. Jax wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and let the heat seep into his palms. Through the window, Mercer Falls was beginning to wake up. A town that had once thrived on coal, now barely surviving on memories and stubbornness. Most of the young people had left. The ones who stayed did so because leaving required a kind of hope they'd long since lost. He'd come here 6 months ago with no plan, just a need to be somewhere that wasn't home, where every street corner didn't remind him of Lily, where he could exist in the anonymous space between grief and whatever came after. But anonymity was a luxury, because the first week he'd sat in this diner, he'd seen Dorothy Brennan flinch when a customer snapped his fingers at her. He'd seen her apologize for something that wasn't her fault. He'd seen the way she made herself smaller when men raised their voices. And he'd seen Lily in every single moment. So he stayed, watching, waiting. For what, he couldn't say. Some part of him knew he was looking for redemption in the bottom of a coffee cup. Looking for a chance to do what he hadn't done 7 years ago. To stand when it mattered. 7:30 a.m. Dorothy's shift had started at 5:30 that morning, same as it had started every morning for longer than she cared to remember. Her alarm had gone off at 4:45, pulling her from a sleep that felt more like drowning than rest. She'd moved quietly through her small house, trying not to wake her mother. Evelyn Brennan, 86 years old, slept in the room that used to be Dorothy's sewing room, back when Dorothy had time for things like sewing. Back before Alzheimer's had turned her mother into a stranger who sometimes remembered her daughter's name and sometimes called her by her sister's name, dead now for 20 years. The nursing home had cost $3,400 a month. Dorothy's salary from the diner was $1,800, the mathematics of impossibility. So she'd brought her mother home 3 months ago, quit the overnight care, learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, learned to smile when her mother looked at her with suspicion and asked who she was and what she was doing in her house. In the kitchen, Dorothy had made oatmeal for Evelyn, measured out medications, left a note for the neighbor who'd check in at noon. Mrs. Patterson, a widow herself, who understood the economics of surviving alone. Then she'd climbed into her 2006 Ford Taurus, a car held together by prayer and duct tape, and driven to the diner through streets empty and dark. Now, 7:30 in the morning, she was on her 5th pot of coffee, and her feet were already aching. She moved between tables on autopilot, refilling cups before they were empty, clearing plates before they were asked to be cleared, reading the small signals of need before customers even knew they needed something. It was a skill developed over decades, the invisible art of service. At table 6, she refilled Gerald Morrison's cup. He came in every morning, had for 15 years, always ordered the same thing, never said thank you. She didn't take it personally anymore. You couldn't afford to take things personally when you needed the job more than the job needed you. At table 3, she brought extra jam to the young couple. The girl had been crying. Dorothy could see it in her red-rimmed eyes, in the way she held her coffee cup like it was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. Dorothy set down the jam without comment, without intrusion, just a small kindness in a world that didn't offer many. The girl looked up surprised. "Thank you." "You're welcome, honey." Such small words, but they mattered. Dorothy had learned that everything small mattered when you'd been small yourself for long enough. She returned to the counter where Frank was working the grill. Frank Dalton, 59 years old, had owned the diner for 32 years. They'd gone to high school together, back when Mercer Falls still had a high school that taught more than 300 students instead of 87. "Busy morning," Frank said, flipping eggs with practiced efficiency. "Always is on Saturdays," Dorothy replied, though it wasn't particularly busy. "But you said things like that. You performed the small talk that made the day feel normal, even when nothing about it was." "You doing okay, Dot?" Frank asked, using the nickname he'd called her since they were 16. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine, but fine was what you said when the truth was too complicated and too heavy to set down in the middle of someone else's morning. Her mortgage payment was due in 3 days, $1,200. The bank had called yesterday, the kind of call that was polite but firm, the kind that reminded you that houses, like dignity, could be taken away when you couldn't pay for them. But she smiled at Frank because that's what you did. You kept the heaviness to yourself. You didn't burden other people with problems they couldn't fix. "Order up," Frank called, sliding plates onto the warming shelf. Dorothy collected them, balanced them with the skill of someone who'd been doing this since she was 24 years old, and headed toward table 12. The biker sat there like he always sat there, quiet, watchful, never causing trouble, but carrying the sense that he could if he needed to. She'd learned his name was Jackson Reeves. He always paid cash. He always tipped $25 on a $12 meal. She tried to refuse the large tips at first, but he'd looked at her with those cold, sad eyes and said, "Please, ma'am, it's not charity, it's respect." So she'd taken them, because she needed them. Because 38 years of pride didn't pay the mortgage or buy her mother's medications. She set his plate down carefully. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, a side of bacon he never ordered but Frank always added. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked. "No, ma'am, this is perfect." "Enjoy." She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Brennan?" She turned back. He'd never used her name before. It caught her off guard. "Yes? I just wanted to say thank you for the kindness. Every morning. It matters." Something in Dorothy's chest tightened. When was the last time someone had thanked her for existing, not just for serving? She couldn't remember. "That's very kind of you to say, Mr. Reeves." He nodded and returned to his meal, and Dorothy continued her rounds. But something had shifted. Some small acknowledgement that she was more than just the woman who poured the coffee. It was such a small thing, but in a life measured in small things, it felt enormous. 2:15 p.m. The lunch rush had come and gone. Not much of a rush these days, but enough to keep Dorothy moving, keep her mind occupied, keep the worry at bay for a few hours. She was clearing table 8 when the door chimed. 3 young men walked in, early 20s, dressed in clothes that cost more than Dorothy made in a month. The kind of casual arrogance that came with never having to worry about whether you could afford to eat the food you were ordering. The one in front was tall, handsome in a carved sort of way, dark hair styled with product that probably had a French name. He wore a watch that caught the light like a small sun on his wrist. Behind him, 2 others, one blonde, one dark-haired, both wearing the same expression of barely contained amusement, like the world was a joke they were in on and everyone else was the punchline. They chose table 7, the big booth near the window, sprawled across it like they owned it. Dorothy approached with menus, her professional smile in place. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Can I start you off with some drinks?" The one in front looked up at her, not at her face, at her uniform, at her name tag, assessing her the way you'd assess a piece of furniture. "Yeah," he said, 3 coffees, and make sure they're hot this time. Last place we went, coffee was cold. Of course, Dorothy said. I'll have those right out. She returned to the counter, poured 3 fresh cups from a pot that had been brewed 10 minutes ago. Steam rose from the surface. She carried them to the table on a tray, set them down carefully. Here you are, nice and hot. Are you ready to order, or do you need a few minutes? The blonde one looked at the menu like it offended him. Do you have anything that's not fried? Like actual food? We have salads, Dorothy offered, and grilled chicken. Yeah, sure, whatever. Grilled chicken. No sauce, no seasoning, just plain. Same, said the dark-haired one. The one in front, the leader, waved his hand dismissively. I'm not eating this garbage, just the coffee. All right, Dorothy said, writing it down. I'll have those orders right out. She walked back to the counter, gave Frank the order. He looked past her at the 3 young men and frowned. That's Trent Ashford, Frank said quietly. Dorothy glanced back. Warren Ashford's son? Yeah, been coming in here the past few weeks. Always acts like he's doing us a favor by breathing our air. Warren Ashford owned half the town. Real estate, construction, the bank. One of the few people who'd gotten richer while Mercer Falls got poorer. His family name was on buildings, on streets, in the memory of the town like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Dorothy had never met him. People like Warren Ashford didn't notice people like Dorothy Brennan. Just be careful, Frank said. The Ashfords don't like being crossed. I'm just bringing him coffee, Frank. I know, just be careful. Dorothy nodded and returned to her work. She'd been serving difficult customers for 38 years. Young men with too much money and too little character were nothing new. You smiled, you served, you collected your tip if they left one, and you forgot them the moment they walked out the door. That was the job. She didn't know yet that today would be different. 2:30 p.m., Jax was still at table 12. He usually left after breakfast, but today he'd stayed. Ordered another coffee, then another, reading a paperback Western that he'd read 3 times before, but brought comfort in its familiarity. But he wasn't really reading. He was watching. The 3 young men at table 7 had his attention, not because they were loud, though they were, not because they were rude, though they were that too, but because of the way the one in front looked at Dorothy Brennan, like she wasn't a person, like she was an obstacle, a thing to be tolerated. Jax had seen that look before, on the faces of the managers who'd ignored Lily's complaints, on the faces of the men who'd made her life hell, and then acted surprised when she couldn't take it anymore. He set his book down and watched. Dorothy brought their food, set it down with the same careful efficiency she brought to every table. The 2 friends started eating without acknowledgement. The one in front, Trent Ashford, Frank had called him, lifted his coffee cup, took a sip, set it down with exaggerated disgust. This coffee is cold, he said loudly. Dorothy stopped mid-turn. I'm sorry, sir. I just poured it 15 minutes ago. Let me bring you a fresh cup. 15 minutes? Trent leaned back in his seat. So you're admitting you brought me old coffee? No, sir, I meant it was freshly brewed. But if you'd like a new cup, I'd like competent service. That too much to ask? The diner had gone quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of people enjoying their meals. The tense quiet of people pretending not to notice something uncomfortable happening. Dorothy's face remained calm, professional. I apologize, sir. Let me get you a fresh pot. She reached for the cup, and Trent Ashford, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in his entire life, tilted the cup and poured the entire contents over Dorothy's head. Time stopped. The coffee, still hot enough to steam, cascaded over her gray hair, down her face, soaking into her uniform. Dorothy stood absolutely still, eyes closed, as the liquid dripped onto the floor around her feet. The 2 friends burst into laughter. One of them held up his phone, recording. Oh shit, dude, did you just... Oops, Trent said, grinning. My bad, guess my hand slipped. No one in the diner moved. 18 people, and not one stood up. Not one said a word. Dorothy opened her eyes slowly. Her hands trembled as she reached for the towel tucked into her apron. She began to wipe her face, her hair, moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago that protest didn't change anything. "Clean yourself up," Trent said casually, already turning back to his friends. "And bring me a fresh coffee, one that's actually hot this time." The humiliation hung in the air like smoke. And in the back of the diner, at table 12, something in Jackson Reeves broke. Not loudly, not violently, just broke. He saw Lily in that moment, saw his sister standing in her work uniform, trying to maintain her dignity while the world poured its casual cruelty over her head. Saw the way she'd learned to make herself small, to apologize, to survive. And he'd done nothing. He'd been 200 miles away, working in the mines, telling himself she was fine, that she was strong enough to handle it. She wasn't. And by the time he realized it, she was dead. 7 years, 2,555 days of carrying that weight. Not again. Not today. Jack stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the awful silence. Every eye in the diner turned toward him. 6'2", 220 pounds, wearing his Hell's Angels cut. Tattoos crawling up his arms like the story of a life lived hard. He walked forward, not fast, not slow, just certain. His boots thudded against the linoleum floor. Each step measured, each step inevitable. He reached table 7 and stopped. Trent looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" Jax didn't answer immediately. He looked at Dorothy first. She was still wiping her face with a towel, still trying to preserve some shred of dignity. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and in them he saw everything he'd seen in Lily's eyes. Fear, shame, resignation. Then he looked at Trent Ashford. "This isn't your place," Jack said quietly. Trent laughed. "And who the fuck are you to decide that?" "Nobody," Jax replied, "just the man who was watching." The silence in the diner changed texture, became something heavier, more dangerous. Trent's friends stopped laughing. One of them stood up, trying to look tough, but his hands were shaking. Trent himself remained seated, but the smirk on his face had frozen into something more uncertain. "You got a problem?" Trent asked, his voice trying for confidence and landing somewhere near fear. "Yeah," Jack said, "I got a problem. You just humiliated that woman for no reason other than you thought you could." "It was an accident." "No, it wasn't. Who the hell do you think you are?" Jax leaned down slightly, bringing his face level with Trent's. His voice dropped to something quiet and cold and absolutely certain. "You're going to apologize to the waitress." Trent's face flushed red. "I'm not apologizing to some waitress." "Yes, you are." "Or what? You gonna hit me? You gonna assault me in front of all these witnesses?" Trent's confidence was returning now, the confidence of someone who'd learned that the law protected people like him and punished people like Jax. Jax straightened up, took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was level, calm, carrying none of the rage he felt burning in his chest. "I'm not going to touch you," Jax said. "I'm going to give you a choice. You apologize to Mrs. Brennan, or you leave, and you don't come back. This is a public place, and she's a human being. Treat her like one." Trent stood up now, trying to use his height to intimidate, but he was 3 inches shorter than Jax and 40 pounds lighter, and everyone in the room could see it. "My father owns this town," Trent said. "You know who my father is?" "Don't care." "You should. One phone call and you'll be run out of here so fast." "Make the call," Jax interrupted. "After you apologize." The standoff held for 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. Frank had emerged from behind the counter, uncertain whether to intervene or call the police. Dorothy stood frozen, still holding the towel, coffee dripping from her hair. The other customers sat statue still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. And Trent Ashford, for the first time in his privileged life, stood face to face with someone who wasn't afraid of him. Someone who didn't care about his father's money or his family's name. Someone who'd seen real darkness and come out the other side, harder and colder and absolutely unwilling to back down. Trent blinked first. "Fuck this," he muttered. He pulled out his wallet, threw a $100 bill on the table. "Keep the change, psycho." He pushed past Jax, his two friends scrambling to follow. The blonde one still had his phone out, recording everything. At the door, Trent turned back. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Jax said nothing, just watched them leave. The door chimed. The BMW's engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as they tore out of the parking lot. The diner remained silent. Jax turned to Dorothy. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or fear, or something else entirely. "I'm sorry if I made things worse, ma'am," Jax said quietly. "I just couldn't watch that happen." Dorothy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No one's ever..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jax nodded once, went back to table 12, left $50 on the table, twice what his bill had been. Walked out of the diner without another word. He climbed onto his Harley, but he didn't start it immediately. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline, maybe, or the weight of what he'd just done, or the memory of everything he hadn't done 7 years ago. Inside the diner, through the window, he could see Dorothy standing in the same spot. Frank had come over, was talking to her, offering her something. She was nodding, but not really present. Jack started his bike. The engine's rumble felt like a heartbeat, steady and sure. He didn't know what would come next. Didn't know if he just made an enemy he couldn't afford to make. Didn't know if standing up would cost him everything. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd do it again. Every single time. Because 7 years ago, Lily had stood alone, and it killed her. Today, Dorothy Brennan hadn't stood alone, and that was worth whatever came next. 6:30 p.m. Dorothy sat in her car in the diner parking lot. Her shift had ended at 6. It was now 6:30, and she still hadn't left. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, no longer shaking, but not quite steady either. The coffee smell had seeped into her hair, her clothes, her skin. She changed into her spare uniform, washed her face in the diner bathroom, tried to scrub away the humiliation. But some stains went deeper than fabric. Frank had wanted her to go home early, told her to take the rest of the day, but she'd refused. Because going home meant thinking about what happened, meant letting it become real. So she'd finished her shift, served tables, poured coffee, smiled at customers, performed the ritual of normalcy. But now, sitting alone in her car, the reality of it settled over her like a weight. She'd been humiliated in front of nearly 20 people, had coffee poured on her head like she was nothing, like she was less than nothing. And no one had done anything except him, the biker, Jackson Reeves, a stranger who'd sat quietly in her diner for 6 months and then stood up when no one else would. Dorothy's eyes burned with tears she wouldn't let fall. Because something had changed today. She just wasn't sure what yet. 11 p.m. Jax sat in his motel room, staring at Lily's photograph. "I stood up today," he said to the picture, "like I should have stood up for you." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But talking to it had become a ritual, a way of keeping her close, a way of remembering that her death meant something. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. He half expected it to ring. Expected the police to call, tell him Warren Ashford had pressed charges. Expected trouble. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the motel air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic on Route 52. Jax lay back on the bed, hands behind his head, and stared at the ceiling. He thought about Dorothy Brennan standing there with coffee dripping from her hair. Thought about the look in her eyes, not anger, not even surprise, just resignation. The look of someone who'd learned to expect cruelty and had stopped being shocked by it. He thought about Lily, about the factory where she'd worked, about the supervisor who'd made her life hell, and the HR department that had told her to be less sensitive, about the way she'd come home quieter each week until she barely spoke at all, about the notes she'd left, 3 sentences that haunted him still. I screamed, nobody heard, or nobody cared. Jax closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come, because he knew something the rest of Mercer Falls didn't know yet. This wasn't over. Men like Trent Ashford didn't accept humiliation. Families like the Ashfords didn't let challenges go unanswered. The storm was coming. Jax had just lit the match, and when it hit, he'd be standing in the center of it. Not because he wanted to be a hero, not because he thought he could fix everything, but because 7 years ago, he'd failed to stand when it mattered most. He wouldn't fail again. Not Dorothy Brennan. Not this time. The photograph of Lily stared at him from the nightstand, frozen in a moment before everything went wrong. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Jax whispered to the empty room, "but I'm here now." And in the quiet of room 12 at the Mercer Motor Lodge, a man who'd spent 7 years running from his failure finally stopped running. The reckoning had begun. September 17th, 2024, 8 a.m. Dorothy woke to the sound of her mother screaming. She bolted upright, heart hammering, already moving before her mind fully registered consciousness. Her feet hit the cold floor and she ran down the hallway to her mother's room. Evelyn Brennan sat upright in bed, eyes wide with terror, pointing at the window. "There's a man out there. Dorothy, there's a man watching us." Dorothy crossed to the window and looked out. Empty street. Morning light filtering through the trees. No man, no threat. Just another ghost from her mother's fragmenting mind. "Mom, it's okay. There's no one there. You're safe." "Don't lie to me. I saw him. He was right there." Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's trembling hands. This was the routine now, multiple times a day sometimes. The Alzheimer's had progressed faster than the doctors predicted. Soon, maybe in months, maybe in weeks, her mother wouldn't recognize her at all. "I promise you're safe, Mom. I'm here. No one's going to hurt you." Evelyn's face crumpled like paper. The fear drained away, replaced by confusion. "Dorothy? When did you get here?" "I've been here all night, Mom." "Oh, that's nice of you to visit." Dorothy helped her mother back down to the pillow, pulled the blanket up, stroked her hair until her breathing steadied. Evelyn's eyes drifted closed. In sleep, she looked peaceful, like the woman she used to be before the disease started erasing her, piece by piece. Dorothy checked the time. 7:45. She should have been at the diner 15 minutes ago. She called Frank from the kitchen, keeping her voice low. "I'm going to be late. Mom had a rough morning." "Take your time, Dot. Are you sure you want to come in today? After yesterday..." Yesterday. The word hung between them like smoke. "I need to work, Frank. I can't afford not to." Silence on the other end. Then, "Okay, but Dot, I need to tell you something. Warren Ashford called me last night." Dorothy's stomach dropped. "What did he say?" "He wants me to fire you." The kitchen floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "He said his son was assaulted in my establishment, that you caused a scene, that the whole thing was your fault." "Frank, you saw what happened. Trent poured coffee on my head. I didn't do anything." "I know, Dot, I know. And I told Warren that. But he said if I don't let you go, he'll make things very difficult for the diner." Dorothy sat down hard at the kitchen table. The same table where bills piled up in neat stacks of impossibility. The same table where she'd sat with her husband Richard before the mining accident took him. The same table where life kept dealing her hands she didn't know how to play. "Are you firing me?" Frank's voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to." "God, Dot, you've been here longer than I have. But Warren owns the note on this building. He could call it in tomorrow if he wanted. I'd lose everything. So yes, you're firing me. I'm asking you to take a leave of absence, unpaid, just until this blows over." How long? I don't know. Dorothy looked at the bills on the table. Mortgage due in 3 days. Her mother's medications. The electricity bill with the red final notice stamp. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Thank you for being honest with me, Frank. Dot, I'm so sorry. If there was any other way, I know. I'll come by tomorrow to get my things. She hung up before he could say anything else, before the sympathy in his voice could break through the fragile wall she'd built to hold herself together. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table and stared at the bills. Did the math she already knew wouldn't work. $1,800 a month from the diner. Gone. Her savings account held $437. She had 2 credit cards, both maxed out. Her car was worth maybe $1,500 if she could find a buyer. The equation was simple and brutal. She was going to lose everything. 9:30 a.m., Jax was at the Rusty Nail, the biker bar on the edge of town where questions weren't asked and everyone minded their own business. He sat at the bar nursing a black coffee, reading yesterday's newspaper without really seeing the words. His phone had been silent all night. No calls from the police, no threats, nothing, which meant the storm was building quietly. The bartender, a man named Hank who'd lost his left arm in Desert Storm, refilled Jax's cup without being asked. You hear about what happened at the diner yesterday? Hank asked. I was there. Figures. The whole town's talking about it. Half of them saying you're a hero, other half saying you're a troublemaker. What do you say? Hank smiled, a crooked thing that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. I say the Ashfords have had it coming for a long time, but I also say you just made yourself an enemy who doesn't lose. Wasn't trying to make an enemy. Never are. But sometimes standing up is the same as starting a war. Jax's phone buzzed on the bar. Unknown number. He answered. Mr. Reeves? A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. Yeah. This is Catherine Marsh, attorney for the Ashford family. I'm calling to inform you that my clients are considering legal action regarding an incident at the Crossroads Diner yesterday. Legal action for what? Assault, intimidation, threatening behavior. My client has video evidence of you approaching his table in a threatening manner. Jax almost laughed. Your client poured coffee on an elderly woman's head. I didn't touch him. That's not what the video shows. I'm extending a courtesy by calling you directly. If you agree to a public apology and stay away from my client and his family, we'll consider the matter closed. And if I don't, then we'll pursue this through the legal system. I should mention that Mr. Warren Ashford has considerable resources and a very good relationship with the county sheriff. I'll think about it. You have until 5 p.m. today to decide. The line went dead. Jax set the phone down, stared at it like it was a snake that had just tried to bite him. Trouble? Hank asked. They want me to apologize and disappear. You gonna do it? Jax thought about Lily, about the factory that had paid her $10,000 to go away quietly, about how she'd taken the money because she needed it, then used it to pay for her own funeral. No, Jax said, I'm not. 11 a.m. The video appeared on Facebook at exactly 11 a.m. It was posted to a page called Mercer Falls Community Events, and within minutes it had been shared 30 times. By noon, 300. By 1 p.m., it had spread beyond Mercer Falls to the regional pages, the state pages, the algorithm picking it up and pushing it out into the world. The video showed Jax standing up from his table, walking toward Trent. The audio was clear enough to hear Jax say, "This isn't your place," and Trent's response. But the video had been edited. It started after the coffee incident. It showed only Jax's confrontation, making it look unprovoked. The caption read, "Local business owner assaulted by violent biker at family diner. This is what happens when criminals think they own our town." The comments section filled up fast. Someone needs to lock this thug up. Typical biker trash. They come to our towns and think they can intimidate hardworking people. I know this guy. He's dangerous. My cousin saw him beat up 2 guys at a bar last year. This was a lie. Jax hadn't been in a fight in 7 years. But there were other comments too. This video is edited. I was there. The Ashford kid poured hot coffee on an old lady first. The Ashfords are lying. Again. Anyone surprised? Where's the full video? Show what really happened. Within hours, the post had 15,000 views. Local news picked it up. Regional news sent reporters. And suddenly, what had happened in a small-town diner was becoming something bigger. Dorothy saw the video on her neighbor's phone. Mrs. Patterson had come over to check on Evelyn and found Dorothy sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "You need to see this, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, holding out her phone. Dorothy watched the edited video, watched herself become invisible in her own humiliation, watched Jax become the villain in a story that had edited out the actual crime. "This isn't what happened," Dorothy said softly. "I know, dear, but it's what they're saying happened." Dorothy handed back the phone. Her hands were steady, her voice was calm, but inside something was shifting, something that had been dormant for 38 years of swallowing her voice and making herself small. "Mrs. Patterson, do you still have that old camera? The one that records videos?" "The camcorder? Yes, I think so. Why?" "I need to borrow it, and I need you to teach me how to use it." 2:30 p.m. Jax was back in his motel room when someone knocked on the door. He opened it to find Dorothy Brennan standing there, holding a canvas bag and looking like she'd made a decision that scared her, but that she was going to make anyway. "Mrs. Brennan," Jax said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "May I come in?" He stepped aside, suddenly aware of how sparse his room was. A bed, a chair, his motorcycle gear in the corner, Lily's photograph on the nightstand. A life reduced to what could fit in a single room. Dorothy sat in the chair. Jax sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining respectful distance. "I lost my job today," Dorothy said, "because of what happened yesterday." "I'm sorry, that's not right." "No, it's not. But it's what happens when you cross the Ashfords." She paused, gathering herself. "I came to thank you for standing up. No one's ever done that for me before." "You don't need to thank me, ma'am." "Yes, I do. And I need to tell you something." She pulled a USB drive from her bag. "Frank gave this to me this morning. It's from the diner's security camera, the full video, everything that happened." Jax took the drive, held it like it was something precious and dangerous at the same time. "The Ashfords posted an edited version," Dorothy continued, "making you look like the aggressor. But this shows the truth, all of it. Why are you giving this to me?" Dorothy's hands clasped together in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, but somehow stronger. "I've spent 38 years being invisible, being quiet, apologizing for existing. And yesterday, I stood there with coffee dripping down my face and I thought, this is it. This is who I am. Someone who gets walked on and says, thank you." She looked up, met Jax's eyes. "But then you stood up, and I realized something. The reason I've been invisible all these years isn't because people don't see me. It's because I've been making myself invisible. Because I was afraid of what would happen if I was seen." "Ma'am, I understand what you're saying, but the Ashfords are powerful. They'll come after you." "They're already coming after me. I've lost my job. They're spreading lies about both of us. And if I stay quiet now, if I let them control the story, then nothing changes. I'll still be invisible, and the next person they humiliate will be invisible too." She stood up, straightened her shoulders. "I want to post the real video. I want people to see what actually happened. But I can't do it alone. I need someone to stand with me if they come after me." Jax looked at this woman who'd spent decades being quiet and was now choosing to be loud. He saw Lily in her, but he also saw something Lily never got the chance to become. Someone who found her voice before it was too late. "I'll stand with you," Jax said, "however long it takes." Dorothy nodded once. "Then let's show them the truth." September 17th, 8 p.m. They posted the video from Jax's laptop, sitting side by side at the small desk in his motel room. The full security camera footage. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Trent complaining about the coffee. Dorothy apologizing. Trent deliberately pouring the hot liquid over her head, while his friends laughed and recorded. Dorothy standing there, humiliated, alone. Then Jax standing, walking over. The conversation. Trent leaving. The whole truth, unedited. Dorothy wrote the caption with shaking hands. "This is what really happened. My name is Dorothy Brennan. I've worked at the Crossroads Diner for 38 years. Yesterday I was humiliated by someone who thought he could treat me like I was nothing. Someone did stand up for me. His name is Jackson Reeves." The edited video you've seen makes him look like the aggressor. This is the truth. Truth matters. Jax hit post. For a moment, nothing happened. The video sat there in the digital void, waiting. Then the first share, then another, then 10, then 50. Within an hour, the video had 5,000 views. Within 3 hours, 50,000. By midnight, 200,000. The comments poured in like a flood. "I'm from Mercer Falls. The Ashfords have been doing this for years." Finally, someone standing up to them. "That poor woman. She deserves so much better." This is what happens when rich kids think they can do whatever they want. Everyone sharing that edited video should be ashamed. This is the real story. Local news called. National news called. Dorothy's phone rang so many times she had to turn it off. And in a mansion on the hill overlooking Mercer Falls, Warren Ashford watched the video with a face carved from stone and called his lawyer. The war had begun. September 19th, 2024, 9 a.m. The letters arrived on the same day. Dorothy received hers by certified mail. A cease and desist from Ashford family attorneys, demanding she remove the video immediately and issue a public apology for defamation. The letter threatened a lawsuit for $1 million if she did not comply within 72 hours. Jax received an identical letter. They met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, away from Mercer Falls, and the eyes that were now watching them constantly. Dorothy read her letter twice, her hand steady. $1 million. "They're trying to scare you," Jax said. "It's working. We can take the video down, walk away. They'll probably drop it if we do." Dorothy folded the letter carefully, creased it with precise movements. "My mortgage is due. I can't pay it. The bank will foreclose in 30 days. I'm going to lose my house regardless." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm just stating facts." She looked up at him. "I've been poor my whole life, Mr. Reeves. I've survived layoffs and recessions, and my husband dying, and my mother's illness. I've survived by being quiet and invisible and grateful for scraps." She set the letter on the table between them. "But you can't sue someone for $1 million if they don't have $1 million to take. I've got a house I'm about to lose, and a car that's worth nothing, and $400 in the bank. What are they going to do? Take my invisibility?" Jax smiled despite himself. "No, ma'am, I suppose they can't." "Then the video stays up." "It does." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 people who'd chosen a hard path when an easy one was available. "Can I ask you something?" Dorothy said. "Why did you really stand up that day? You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything." Jax pulled out his phone, showed her the photograph of Lily. "My sister. 7 years ago, she worked at a meatpacking plant. Her supervisor sexually harassed her for months. She reported it to HR. They told her to be less sensitive. Her co-workers turned on her, called her a troublemaker. What happened? They offered her $10,000 to quit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. She took it because she needed the money. Then she used most of it to pay for her funeral in advance. Took her own life a month later." Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God." "She left me a note, 3 sentences. I screamed. Nobody heard. Or nobody cared." Jax's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "I was working 200 miles away. Told myself she was fine. that she was tough enough to handle it. By the time I realized she wasn't, it was too late. Mr. Reeves, that wasn't your fault. I know, but knowing something and feeling it are different things. He looked at Dorothy. When I saw Trent pour that coffee on you, I saw Lily. Saw all the moments no one stood up for her. And I thought, not again, not on my watch. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed his hand. A brief touch, but it carried weight. Your sister would be proud of you. I hope so, ma'am. I really do. September 25th, 2024, 3 p.m. Warren Ashford arrived at Dorothy's house in a black Mercedes. Alone, no lawyer, no witnesses. Dorothy watched from the window as he walked up her cracked driveway, past the garden she no longer had time to tend, to her front door. She opened it before he could knock. Warren Ashford was 56 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than Dorothy's car. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once, but had hardened into something else through years of getting what he wanted. Mrs. Brennan, may I come in? No. I'd like to speak with you privately. Anything you have to say, you can say from there. Warren smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Very well, I'm here to make you an offer. $60,000, cash, today. Dorothy's heart jumped despite herself. $60,000, almost 2 years of salary, 18 months of her mother's care. In exchange for? You remove the video, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you issue a public statement saying the incident was a misunderstanding and that you hold no ill will toward my son. That's a lie. It's a solution. To your problem, not mine. Warren's smile faded. Mrs. Brennan, I'm trying to be reasonable. That video has been viewed over 1 million times. It's damaging my son's reputation. It's affecting my business. I'm offering you more money than you've probably saved in your entire life. And if I say no, then I'll sue you for defamation. $1 million. You'll lose. You'll declare bankruptcy. You'll lose your house, your car, everything. Your mother will end up in a state facility. Is that what you want? Dorothy felt the weight of it, the threat that was also a promise. She thought about her mother, about Evelyn's moments of clarity that were coming less and less often, about the pills that kept her mother comfortable, about the house that held every memory of her marriage, her life. I need time to think about it. You have 72 hours, that's all. Warren turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. That biker you've allied yourself with, Jackson Reeves, he has a record. Assault, battery. He's dangerous. You should be careful who you trust. Mr. Ashford? He turned back. Your son poured hot coffee on my head in front of 20 people and thought it was funny. I know exactly who I should be careful of trusting. Warren's face went cold. He walked back to his Mercedes without another word, drove away, leaving tire marks on her driveway like a scar. Dorothy closed the door, leaned against it, and allowed herself exactly 1 minute to shake. Then she called Jax. They offered me money, she said when he answered. How much? 60,000. Jax was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of money. It is. I won't judge you if you take it, Mrs. Brennan. I mean that. I know you won't, but I'll judge myself. She looked around her small living room, at the life she'd built from nothing and maintained through sheer stubbornness. Can you come over? There's someone I want you to meet. 7 p.m. Jax arrived at Dorothy's house as the sun was setting, painting Mercer Falls in shades of amber and shadow. Dorothy led him into the living room, where an elderly woman sat in a recliner, a blanket over her lap, staring at a television that wasn't on. Mom, Dorothy said gently, there's someone here I want you to meet. Evelyn Brennan turned her head slowly. Her eyes were clouded, distant, but something flickered there when she saw Jax. Is this your young man, Dorothy? Dorothy smiled. No, Mom, this is a friend. His name is Jackson. You look like you've seen some trouble, Jackson, Evelyn said, and for a moment her voice was clear, present, the woman she used to be before Alzheimer's started taking her away. Yes, ma'am. Jax said, sitting carefully in the chair across from her. I've seen my share. My daughter's seen trouble too. Lost her husband, lost her dreams. But she's still standing, you know why? No, ma'am. Evelyn reached out with a trembling hand and touched Dorothy's face. Because she's stronger than she knows. Always has been. I just wish I'd told her that more when I could remember to say it. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Evelyn's clarity faded as quickly as it came. Her eyes went distant again. Is Richard coming home for dinner? Soon, Mom, Dorothy said softly, even though Richard had been dead for 12 years. She led Jax into the kitchen, leaving her mother to her television ghosts. She has moments, Dorothy said, where she's fully there. They're getting rarer. She loves you. I know. That's why this is hard. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table, gestured for Jax to join her. Warren Ashford said if I don't take his money and sign his papers, he'll sue me. I'll lose everything. Mom will end up in a state facility. That's probably true. So the smart thing is to take the money, protect her, protect myself. Yes. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, went to a drawer, pulled out an old newspaper clipping. She handed it to Jax. The article was from 21 years ago. Local teacher honored for service. A photograph showed a younger Dorothy receiving an award, smiling, surrounded by children. I used to be a teacher, Dorothy said. 4th grade. 22 years. I loved it. Made $32,000 a year, barely enough to survive, but I loved those kids. What happened? Budget cuts. They had to let the newer teachers go first, but I was on the list eventually. Lost my job the same year Richard died in the mine accident. No severance, no pension, nothing. She took the clipping back, looked at it like it was a photograph of someone else. I took the job at the diner because I needed work, and it was all I could find. Told myself it would be temporary. That was 38 years ago. She set the clipping down. I've spent nearly 4 decades apologizing for existing, being grateful for minimum wage, accepting that this is all I deserve. That's not true. I know that now. But knowing something and believing it are different things. She looked at Jax. If I take Warren's money and sign his paper, I'm saying that my dignity has a price, that humiliation can be bought and sold, that powerful people can do whatever they want as long as they pay enough. You're also saying your mother's care matters, that keeping your home matters. Those things aren't shameful. No, but silence is. Dorothy's voice strengthened. This afternoon, a woman I don't know sent me a message. She said she worked for one of Warren's companies 5 years ago. Said she was harassed, reported it, and was fired. She signed a non-disclosure agreement for $15,000 because she needed it. And every day since, she's regretted it. Dorothy pulled out her phone, showed Jax the message. She said watching me speak up gave her courage. She's ready to break her NDA to tell her story. There are others too. Women, men, people the Ashfords have silenced over the years. She set the phone down. If I take the money and disappear, I'm telling all of them that silence is still the safer choice, that speaking up isn't worth the cost. And if you don't take the money, you lose everything. Maybe, probably, but I'll lose it standing up instead of kneeling down. Jax looked at this woman who'd been invisible her whole life and was now choosing to be seen. Consequences be damned. He thought about Lily, about the money she took and how it poisoned her from the inside, about how silence had killed her as surely as the rope. What do you need from me? Jax asked. Stand with me. When they come, and they will come, I need someone who won't run. I won't run, even if it costs you. Jax thought about the motel room that had been his home for 6 months, about the life he'd been living, drifting, running from the ghost of his sister, about the moment at the diner when he'd finally stopped running and started standing. Especially then, he said. Dorothy smiled. Not the practiced professional smile she wore at the diner, a real smile, tired and scared and determined all at once. Then we tell Warren Ashford no, and we get ready for whatever comes next. September 26th, 2024, 10 a.m. The woman's name was Margaret O'Brien. She was 70 years old, white-haired, with eyes that had seen too much grief. She arrived at Dorothy's house carrying a cardboard box filled with documents. Dorothy and Jack sat with her at the kitchen table while Evelyn watched television in the other room, lost in whatever decade her mind had wandered to. "My son Daniel worked for Ashford Construction," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the pain in it. 5 years ago, he was a foreman, good at his job, honest. She pulled out a folder, opened it to show emails, time cards, incident reports. He reported safety violations. The crew was working with faulty equipment. Daniel told his supervisor, told the site manager, told Warren Ashford himself. They told him to mind his own business or find another job. "What happened?" Dorothy asked. 3 months later, there was an accident. Scaffolding collapsed. 2 men were injured, could have been killed. Daniel filed an official report with OSHA. 2 weeks after that, he was fired. They said he was creating a hostile work environment. Margaret's hands trembled as she pulled out more documents. Daniel fought it, tried to sue for wrongful termination. The Ashfords buried him in legal fees, tied the case up for 2 years. Daniel ran out of money, lost his house. His wife left him. He started drinking. She pulled out a death certificate. 4 years ago, Daniel drove his truck into a tree at 70 miles an hour. The police called it an accident, but I found the note he left. It wasn't an accident. Jax and Dorothy sat in the weight of it. Another life, another person silenced. "Why didn't you speak up before?" Dorothy asked gently. "Because I was afraid. Because Warren's lawyers made me sign a settlement agreement when Daniel died. $25,000 to keep quiet about the wrongful termination. I took it because I needed it, and because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I couldn't save my son. Ashamed that I let them buy my silence." Margaret looked at Dorothy with eyes that had cried all the tears they had. "But when I saw your video, when I saw you refuse to be invisible, I realized something. My silence didn't protect Daniel. It just meant he died for nothing." She pushed the box of documents across the table. "This is everything. Emails, reports, evidence that the Ashfords have been doing this for years, covering up violations, silencing complaints, destroying people who stand up to them." "Why give this to us?" Jax asked. "Because I can't let another person die thinking nobody cared enough to listen. And because maybe, if enough of us stop being silent, they'll finally have to answer for what they've done." Dorothy took Margaret's hand, 2 elderly women who'd both lost too much, holding on to each other in the wreckage. "We'll stand together," Dorothy said. "All of us." "There are others," Margaret said. "I've been reaching out. 2 more people who work for Ashford companies, who were fired or harassed or silenced. They're ready to come forward if you are." Jax felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee anymore. It was bigger, deeper, years of buried voices rising to the surface. "We need to be ready," Jax said. "When we do this, when we bring all of this forward, Warren will come at us with everything he has." "Let him come," Dorothy said. And for the first time since Jax had known her, she didn't sound afraid. September 27th, 2024, 11 p.m. Dorothy sat at her kitchen table, unable to sleep. Tomorrow was the deadline. 72 hours since Warren's offer. Tomorrow she had to give him her answer. $60,000 sat on one side of the scale. Everything she could lose on the other. Her mother's voice drifted from the bedroom. "Richard? Richard, where are you?" Dorothy went to her, helped her back to bed, held her hand until she drifted off again. When she returned to the kitchen, she found the letter she'd written earlier. 2 versions. One accepting Warren's offer, one declining it. She read them both. The acceptance was practical, responsible, the smart choice that would keep her mother safe and her house intact. The decline was reckless, dangerous, the choice that might cost her everything. Dorothy thought about her mother's moment of clarity. She's stronger than she knows. She thought about Margaret O'Brien, choosing to break her silence after 4 years of grief. She thought about Jax and Lily, and how silence had killed one of them, while the other spent 7 years trying to atone. She thought about the message from the woman who'd regretted taking the money, about the others who were ready to come forward if she led the way. And she thought about herself, about 38 years of being invisible, of apologizing, of making herself small. Dorothy picked up the acceptance letter and tore it in half. Then she called Jax. "It's late," he said when he answered, but there was no sleep in his voice. He'd been waiting. "I'm saying no," Dorothy said, "to the money, to the silence, to all of it." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." There was a pause. Then Jack said, "Then we do this right. Tomorrow morning, we call the others. Margaret, the two who work for Ashford. We tell the whole story, everything. Warren will destroy us. Maybe, but we'll be standing when he does." Dorothy looked out her window at the dark streets of Mercer Falls, a town that had forgotten how to stand up for itself, a town where silence had become survival. "Mr. Reeves?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being the one who stood. Thank you for being the one who kept standing." Dorothy hung up and sat in the quiet of her kitchen. The bills were still there, the mortgage still due, her mother still disappearing day by day. But something had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. And tomorrow the whole town would see exactly what that meant. September 28th, 2024, 10 a.m. The town square of Mercer Falls hadn't seen a gathering like this in 15 years, not since the mine closed, and half the town showed up to protest a closure that happened anyway. Today, 43 people stood in the morning sun. Some held signs, some held phones recording. Most just stood there, silent witnesses to something that felt like the beginning of change, or the end of hope, depending on which side you were on. Dorothy Brennan stood on the courthouse steps, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped a piece of paper with notes she'd written at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. Beside her stood Jax, solid and quiet, wearing his Hell's Angels cut like armor. Margaret O'Brien stood on her other side, 70 years old and tired, but upright. 2 others flanked them. James Hartley, 42, fired from Ashford Enterprises 3 years ago for reporting wage theft, and Lisa Monroe, 38, who'd been sexually harassed by a manager at an Ashford property and paid $15,000 to disappear. A local news crew had set up their camera. WVTV, the regional station that covered 3 counties and usually reported on high school football games and county fairs. But today they'd sent their actual news team because something was happening in Mercer Falls that mattered beyond the town limits. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Kim, held her microphone and waited. Dorothy looked out at the faces. Some she recognized from the diner. Customers who'd sat in her section for years and never learned her name. Some were strangers. Some were friends who'd stayed away since the video went viral, afraid of being associated with trouble. And in the back, standing apart from the crowd, she saw Warren Ashford. Not hiding, not running. Standing there in his expensive suit with his lawyer beside him, watching with cold calculation. Dorothy took a breath. Jack squeezed her shoulder once, briefly. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Not if you're not ready." "I've been waiting 38 years to be ready," Dorothy replied. "If I wait any longer, I'll be dead." She stepped forward to the microphone someone had set up. The feedback squealed briefly, then settled. "My name is Dorothy Brennan," she said, and her voice shook, but it carried. "I've lived in Mercer Falls my whole life, 62 years. I've worked at the Crossroads Diner for 38 of those years. I've poured your coffee. I've served your breakfast. I've listened to your stories and remembered your names even when you didn't remember mine." The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "A week ago, I was humiliated. Someone poured hot coffee on my head because he thought he could. Because people like him have always been able to do things like that to people like me. And I stood there and took it because that's what I've always done. That's what we've all done. She glanced at Margaret, at James, at Lisa. But someone stood up for me. Jackson Reeves, a man I barely knew. And when he did that, something broke open inside me. I realized I'd spent my whole life being invisible, not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. Because being invisible felt safer than being seen. Her voice grew stronger. The Ashford family offered me $60,000 to take down the video, to sign a paper saying I'd never speak about what happened, to go back to being invisible. Warren Ashford's face remained impassive, but his lawyer whispered something in his ear. I said no, because I'm done being invisible, and I'm not alone. Margaret stepped forward. Her voice was quieter than Dorothy's, worn by grief, but it didn't break. My son Daniel worked for Ashford Construction. He reported safety violations. They fired him. He fought back. They buried him in legal fees. 4 years ago, my son drove his truck into a tree and died. He left a note. He said he couldn't live with being silenced. The crowd shifted. Someone in the back gasped. James Hartley spoke next. I worked for Ashford Enterprises. They shorted my paycheck every week, $30 here, $50 there. When I reported it, they called me a liar and fired me. They paid me $8,000 to go away. Lisa Monroe's voice shook, but held. I was assaulted by my manager. I reported it. They told me I was being dramatic. They offered me $15,000 in a non-disclosure agreement. I took it because I was scared. I've regretted it every day since. Dorothy stepped forward again. This isn't about one cup of coffee. This is about a pattern. Years of powerful people hurting others and paying them to stay quiet. Years of us staying quiet because we were afraid. She looked directly at Warren Ashford. But we're not quiet anymore. The reporter moved in with her microphone. Mrs. Brennan, the Ashford family's attorney, has sent cease and desist letters threatening a $1 million lawsuit. Aren't you afraid? Dorothy almost laughed. Ma'am, I have $400 in my bank account and a house I'm about to lose. You can't sue someone for $1 million they don't have. The only thing I own is my voice, and I'm not selling it. The camera panned across the crowd, capturing faces. Some nodding, some crying, some just watching, processing, deciding which side of history they wanted to stand on. Sarah Kim turned to her camera. This is Sarah Kim reporting from Mercer Falls, where what started as a viral video has become something much larger, a reckoning. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people approaching Dorothy and the others, some to offer support, some just to shake their hands. Warren Ashford walked toward them, his lawyer trying to hold him back. This isn't over, Warren said, his voice low and hard. No, Jax replied, stepping between him and Dorothy. It's not. It's just beginning. Warren stared at Jax for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his Mercedes, leaving the town square without another word. But everyone there knew what was coming. October 6th, 2024, 9 a.m. The lawsuit arrived exactly when Warren promised it would. Ashford Family Trust versus Dorothy Brennan, Jackson Reeves, Margaret O'Brien, James Hartley, and Lisa Monroe. $1 million in damages for defamation, emotional distress, and conspiracy to harm the Ashford family's business interests. Dorothy read the papers at her kitchen table while her mother slept fitfully in the next room. The legal language was dense and threatening, designed to intimidate. It was working. Her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Mrs. Brennan, my name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Defense Fund. I saw your press conference. I'd like to help. Dorothy's throat tightened. I can't afford a lawyer. You don't need to. We work pro bono for cases like this, cases that matter. Why would you want to help us? Rebecca's voice was warm but firm. Because I spent 15 years as a prosecutor watching powerful people use the law as a weapon against the powerless. I got tired of it. Now I fight back. We're going to lose, aren't we? They have unlimited money. We have nothing. You have the truth. That's not nothing. And you have something else. You have people paying attention. This story has been picked up by national news. The court of public opinion is already on your side. That doesn't win lawsuits. No, but it changes them. It makes them harder to bury, and it makes settlement more attractive to the other side than litigation. Dorothy felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. What do? We prove everything you said is true. We show the pattern. We make them sorry they ever filed this suit. When do we start? Right now. October 15th, 2024. 2 p.m., Rebecca Walsh arrived in Mercer Falls with 2 associates and enough determination to fill the small conference room at the public library where they'd set up their war room. For 9 days they worked, building the case, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses. Margaret provided Daniel's documents, emails proving he'd reported safety violations, OSHA reports showing the violations were real, records of his wrongful termination lawsuit that had been buried in procedural delays. James brought pay stubs showing systematic wage theft, bank records proving the pattern, text messages from other employees experiencing the same thing. Lisa had saved everything, emails from her harasser, HR reports she'd filed, the settlement agreement with its non-disclosure clause. And Rebecca found others, 6 more people who'd worked for Ashford companies over the past decade, all with similar stories, all who'd been paid to disappear, all willing now to break their silence. The pattern was undeniable. Jack spent his days tracking down witnesses. His Hell's Angels network spread across 3 states proved useful. A former Ashford employee who'd moved to Pennsylvania, another in Ohio, people who'd scattered when they were forced out, now willing to come back and testify. Dorothy spent her days caring for her mother and her nights reviewing documents with Rebecca, learning legal terms, understanding strategy, becoming more than a victim, becoming a fighter. On October 15th, Rebecca filed their response to the lawsuit, not just a defense, a countersuit. Pattern and practice of harassment, wrongful termination, workplace safety violations, conspiracy to silence victims. The response was 43 pages long and included sworn affidavits from 11 people. When the Mercer Falls Gazette published the story, Warren Ashford's lawyer called Rebecca directly. "You're making a mistake," Martin Cross said. "No," Rebecca replied. "Your client made the mistake when he filed this suit. We were going to stay quiet. Now we're going loud. We'll bury you in discovery, drag this out for years." "Good. That gives us more time to find more victims. We've already found 11. How many more do you think are out there, Mr. Cross?" The line went silent for a moment. "My client is willing to discuss settlement. Tell your client we'll see him in court." Rebecca hung up and looked at Dorothy, who'd been listening to the call on speaker. "They're scared," Rebecca said. "Good," Dorothy replied. "They should be." October 28th, 2024, 10 a.m. The Mercer County Courthouse was built in 1923, a testament to a time when coal money flowed and justice was supposed to mean something. Today it was packed beyond capacity, people standing in the hallways, reporters lined up outside. Dorothy sat at the plaintiff's table between Rebecca and Jack's. Her hands were folded in her lap, steady now. She'd spent the night before with her mother, who'd had one of her rare, clear moments. "Are you afraid?" Evelyn had asked. "Terrified," Dorothy admitted. "Good. Fear means you're doing something that matters." Now, sitting in the courtroom, Dorothy held on to those words like a lifeline. The defense table was crowded. Warren Ashford, Trent Ashford, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, and assistants with briefcases that probably cost more than Dorothy's car. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, 68 years old. She'd been on the bench for 22 years and had a reputation for not suffering fools or bullies. This is Ashford Family Trust versus Brennan et al., Judge Morrison said. I've reviewed the complaint and the response. Mr. Cross, you may present your opening statement. Martin Cross stood, polished, confident, the kind of lawyer who'd never lost because he represented clients who could afford to win. Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendants engaged in a coordinated campaign to defame my clients using edited videos and false statements. They have damaged the Ashford family's reputation and business interests. We're seeking damages and an injunction preventing further defamatory statements. He spoke for 20 minutes, painting Dorothy and the others as opportunists seeking money and attention. Then Rebecca stood. She was shorter than Cross. Her suit was off the rack instead of bespoke. But when she spoke, the courtroom leaned in. Your Honor, we will prove that every statement made by the defendants is true. We will show a pattern spanning 10 years of the Ashford family using their wealth and power to silence employees who reported violations, harassment, and unsafe working conditions. We will prove that they paid at least 17 people to sign non-disclosure agreements rather than address legitimate complaints. Rebecca's voice strengthened. This isn't a defamation case. It's an attempt to weaponize the legal system against people who dared to speak truth to power, and we will not be silenced. The judge made notes. Very well, Mr. Cross, call your first witness. The trial had begun. Day 1. 3 witnesses for the prosecution. All testified that the video had damaged the Ashford family's reputation. All admitted under cross-examination they'd never actually watched the full video, only the edited version. Day 2. Trent Ashford took the stand. Martin Cross walked him through a carefully rehearsed testimony. The coffee was an accident. Dorothy had been clumsy. Jax had approached threateningly. Trent had felt endangered. Then Rebecca stood for cross-examination. Mr. Ashford, in the video, your hand tilts the cup directly over Mrs. Brennan's head. That's visible, correct? It could look like that, but yes or no, your hand tilts the cup. Trent shifted. Yes, but I didn't mean... And your friends were recording and laughing. Is that the usual response to an accident? We were just... Yes or no, Mr. Ashford, his lawyer objected. The judge overruled. They were laughing, Trent admitted quietly. And you said, oops, my bad, is that correct? I was trying to apologize. By telling her to clean herself up? Trent's face reddened. I was embarrassed. You were embarrassed? Not Mrs. Brennan, who had hot coffee poured on her head? Objection, argumentative, sustained. Move on, Ms. Walsh. Rebecca pulled out a document. Mr. Ashford, is this your social media account? Yes. And did you post this message 6 months before the incident? Quote, service workers need to remember their place. You're there to serve, not have opinions. The courtroom went silent. I don't remember posting that. But it's from your account, posted April 2024. Do you stand by that statement? Trent looked at his father. Warren's face was stone. That was taken out of context. What context makes that statement acceptable, Mr. Ashford? No answer. Rebecca let the silence hang. No further questions. Day 3, Dorothy testified. She walked through her 38 years at the diner, the regulars she'd served, the kindness and cruelty she'd witnessed, the moment Trent poured the coffee. What went through your mind, Rebecca asked. That this was it. This was who I'd always be. Someone people could humiliate and walk away from. What changed? Dorothy looked at Jax, sitting in the gallery. Someone stood up. And I realized if he could stand for me, I could stand for myself. Cross's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her memory, her motives, her finances, implied she was seeking money. Isn't it true you're about to lose your house? Yes. And you're facing significant medical bills for your mother? Yes. So you have financial motivation to pursue this case? Dorothy met his eyes. Mr. Cross, I could have taken $60,000 and made my problems go away. I said no, because some things matter more than money. Like what? Like being able to look at myself in the mirror, like knowing I didn't let them buy my silence, like showing my mother, who's losing her memory, that she raised someone with a spine. The courtroom was silent. Cross moved on quickly. Day 4. The pattern emerged. Margaret testified about Daniel, James about the wage theft, Lisa about the harassment. Then the 6 others Rebecca had found. One after another, they told their stories. Different industries, different complaints, same outcome. Complain, get fired or harassed, get offered money to disappear, sign the NDA, stay silent. The pattern was undeniable. On cross-examination, Cross attacked each one, called them disgruntled, suggested they were coordinating testimony, implied financial motive. But he couldn't explain away the documents, the emails, the settlement agreements, the pattern that stretched across 10 years. Day 5, Jax testified. He told the court about Lily, about watching his sister be silenced, about the moment in the diner when he saw it happening again. Why did you intervene? Rebecca asked. Because I didn't intervene 7 years ago when my sister needed someone to stand up, and it killed her. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Did you threaten Mr. Ashford? No, I gave him a choice. Apologize or leave. He chose to leave. Cross tried to paint Jax as violent, brought up his assault record from 15 years ago. You have a history of violence, don't you, Mr. Reeves? I defended my sister from a police officer who was arresting her for a crime she didn't commit. I'd do it again. So you admit you're willing to use violence? I'm willing to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That day at the diner, I used words, only words. Day 6. Warren Ashford took the stand. He was polished, prepared, testified that his companies had strong HR policies, that any settlements were standard practice, that he was being unfairly targeted. Rebecca waited until cross-examination. Mr. Ashford, how many non-disclosure agreements has your company signed in the past 10 years? I don't have that number. Your counsel produced 17 in discovery. Does that sound right? Approximately. 17 people paid to stay silent about problems in your companies. Does that concern you? Those were mutually agreed upon settlements. Did any of those 17 people receive justice for their complaints? They received compensation. That's not what I asked. Did anyone who reported harassment, safety violations, or wage theft see those problems actually addressed? Warren's jaw tightened. We take all complaints seriously. Then why did you offer Mrs. Brennan $60,000 to delete the video and sign an NDA? That was a settlement offer. To make her go away, just like the others. Objection. Withdrawn. Rebecca pulled out another document. Mr. Ashford, is this an email from you to your attorney dated September 16th, 2 days after the incident? I'd need to review. It says, quote, we need to shut this down fast. Offer her whatever it takes to make her disappear. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Did you write that? The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison gavelled for silence. Warren's face went pale. That email was privileged. It was sent to your attorney as part of a plan to commit witness tampering, which removes privilege. Did you write it? Warren looked at his lawyers, at his son, at the packed courtroom watching his empire crack. Yes, he said quietly. Rebecca let the moment breathe. No further questions. Day 7, closing arguments. Cross spoke first, painted the defendants as manipulators, called the pattern coincidence, insisted his clients' reputations had been damaged. Then Rebecca stood. Your Honor, members of the court, this case isn't complicated. Powerful people did harm. Victims spoke up. And instead of addressing the harm, the powerful people tried to silence the victims again. Not with money this time, with lawsuits. She gestured to Dorothy. Mrs. Brennan worked for 38 years in quiet service, asked for nothing, caused no trouble, until someone poured coffee on her head and thought it was funny. And when she found her voice, when she finally said, "No more," they tried to take even that away from her. Rebecca's voice rose. But here's what the Ashfords didn't count on. When one person finds their voice, others find theirs too. And when enough voices join together, they become impossible to silence. She turned to the judge. We ask the court to dismiss the Ashford family's claims and to find in favor of the defendants on all counts of our counterclaim. Not for money, but for the simple recognition that truth is not defamation, that speaking up is not a crime, that dignity matters more than wealth. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison took 2 days to deliberate. November 5th, 2024, 10 a.m. The courtroom was even more packed than before. National news crews, state reporters, every seat filled. Dorothy sat with her hands folded, Jax beside her, Rebecca on her other side. She'd spent the waiting days in a strange calm. Whatever came next, she'd told the truth. That had to count for something. Judge Morrison entered. Everyone stood. Please be seated. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented. This case required careful consideration because it touches on fundamental questions about power, accountability, and the right to speak. The judge looked directly at the Ashford table. The plaintiffs claim defamation, but defamation requires false statements. Everything the defendant said has been proven true. Mr. Ashford did pour coffee on Mrs. Brennan. The Ashford family companies did engage in a pattern of silencing complaints with non-disclosure agreements. These are facts, not opinions. Warren's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the table edge. Furthermore, the email Mr. Ashford sent to his attorney demonstrates an intent to silence Mrs. Brennan through financial pressure, following a pattern established over many years. Judge Morrison shifted her attention to Dorothy. Mrs. Brennan, you stood up when it would have been easier and more profitable to stay silent. That took courage. This court recognizes that courage. The judge's voice strengthened. The Ashford family's defamation claims are dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's counterclaims regarding wrongful termination and pattern of harassment are sustained. I'm ordering the Ashford Family Trust to pay legal fees and costs for the defense, totaling $68,000. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Additionally, I'm recommending that the West Virginia Department of Labor conduct a comprehensive investigation into employment practices at all Ashford-owned businesses. And I'm ordering all non-disclosure agreements signed with former Ashford employees to be voided, allowing those individuals to speak freely about their experiences. Warren stood abruptly. His lawyers tried to hold him back, but he walked out of the courtroom, his son following. Judge Morrison gavelled one final time. This court is adjourned. Dorothy sat in the noise and chaos of celebration around her, feeling strangely quiet. Jax pulled her into a brief hug. Rebecca was already talking to reporters. Margaret was crying, but Dorothy just sat there, processing what had happened. She'd won. Not money, not revenge, but something more important, her voice back. November 12th, 2024, 4 p.m. The envelope appeared on Dorothy's doorstep with no postmark, no return address. Inside, a check for $800 and a handwritten letter. Mrs. Brennan, I've been working construction for 6 weeks. This is what I've saved. It's not enough. It'll never be enough, but it's all I have. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that what you did, standing up, speaking truth, it changed something in me. My father cut me off after the trial, said I humiliated the family by admitting what I did. But the truth is, I humiliated myself. You just made me see it. I'm learning what real work means, what it means to earn respect instead of expecting it. I have a long way to go. Thank you for teaching me what my father never did. that people matter more than power, that dignity isn't for sale. I'm sorry, Trent Ashford. Dorothy read the letter twice, sat with it. She didn't cash the check. Not yet, maybe not ever. But she kept the letter. Because redemption wasn't instant, it was a process. And Trent was at the beginning of a very long road. That was enough for now. December 1st, 2024. Dorothy stood in what had been the diner's storage room, now converted into a small community space. 6 elderly people sat in comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Her mother Evelyn was one of them, having a good day, lucid and present. Dorothy had used the legal fee award to save her house and transform part of it into an adult daycare. Not for profit, just for care, for people who needed community and couldn't afford the expensive facilities. Frank had helped, donating furniture. Jax had built wheelchair ramps. The community had come together in small ways that added up to something real. Mrs. Dorothy, one of the elderly men said, "Could you tell us that story again? About standing up?" Dorothy smiled. "I think you've all heard it enough times." "No," Evelyn said, her voice clear. "Tell it again. Some of us need to remember that standing up is possible." So Dorothy told it, not as a victim's story, not as a hero's journey, just as the truth of one moment when silence broke and voices found each other. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then one of the elderly women raised her hand. "I worked at the textile mill for 40 years. They cheated us on overtime. I never said anything, but I'm saying it now." Another voice. "I was harassed at my job, took the money and stayed quiet, but my daughter works now. I don't want her to think silence is the only option." One by one they spoke, small voices that had been quiet for decades, finding courage in Dorothy's story to tell their own. This was what winning looked like. Not a judgment, not money, just people finding their voices and learning they didn't have to use them alone. December 20th, 2024 7 a.m. Jax sat at table 12 in the Crossroads Diner. Same spot, same order, but everything else had changed. A new waitress, Amy, brought his coffee. The diner had survived Warren's threats. Frank had found new investors. The community had rallied. "You're that guy," Amy said, not afraid, just matter of fact. "From the video." "Yeah, thank you. My sister works retail. Her manager was harassing her. She reported it because of what you all did. They actually fired him. First time I've seen someone actually face consequences." Jax nodded. "That's good." Amy moved on to other tables, and Jax sipped his coffee, watching the morning unfold. Dorothy didn't work here anymore, but her impact remained. The way staff treated each other, the way customers spoke to servers, small changes that rippled outward. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Reeves?" An elderly woman's voice, scared but determined. "Yeah. My name is Clara Patterson. I'm from Ohio. I saw the news about what happened in Mercer Falls. I have a similar situation. My boss, I don't know what to do." Jax looked at table 12, the last table, where he'd sat for 6 months watching before he finally stood. "Where are you, Clara?" "Columbus, about 3 hours from you." "Stay where you are. I'll make some calls. You're not alone." He hung up and immediately dialed Rebecca Walsh, then Dorothy, then Margaret, the network they'd built, the voices they'd connected. One case in Mercer Falls had become something bigger. People were reaching out, finding courage in the story, learning that silence could be broken. Jax stood, left money on the table, and walked out into the cold December morning. 7 years ago, Lily had died thinking nobody cared. Now, somewhere in Ohio, Clara Patterson was learning she wasn't alone. The reckoning had started in a small-town diner over a cup of coffee, but it wasn't ending there. It was spreading, growing, becoming something bigger than any of them. Jax climbed onto his Harley. The engine rumbled to life, steady and sure as a heartbeat. He thought about Lily, about the photograph on his nightstand. About 7 years of carrying her ghost. I stood up, Lily, he said to the cold air, and I'll keep standing. The road stretched ahead of him. Ohio first, then wherever the next voice called from. Because some fights don't end, they just find new battlefields. And Jax had finally found his purpose in the wreckage of his grief. To be the one who stands, who listens, who reminds people that their voices matter. He pulled out of the parking lot and rode toward whatever came next. Behind him, Mercer Falls woke to another ordinary day. But ordinary had changed. People smiled at their waitresses now, learned their names, treated them like humans instead of furniture. Small changes, but revolutions start small. In the town square, someone had placed a plaque on the courthouse steps where Dorothy had spoken. Here on September 28, 2024, Dorothy Brennan found her voice and reminded us all that silence protects nothing but the powerful. Dorothy saw it on her morning walk, stood there reading it, her mother's hand in hers. "Did you really do all that?" Evelyn asked, having one of her clear moments. "I did, Mom. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me, too." They walked home together through streets that looked the same but felt different. Because everything had changed, and nothing had changed. The powerful were still powerful. The vulnerable were still vulnerable. But now the vulnerable knew something they hadn't known before. They had voices. And when voices joined together, they became impossible to ignore. Dorothy's phone buzzed. A message from someone she didn't know. "I saw your story. I'm speaking up about my workplace. Thank you for showing me it's possible." She smiled and kept walking. One voice had become two. Two had become 17. 17 had become hundreds. And somewhere, someone else was standing at their own crossroads, making the choice between silence and voice. The reckoning wasn't over. It was just beginning. And every person who chose to speak was writing the next chapter. 6 months later, Trent Ashford stood at a construction site, his hands calloused from real work, his back aching from real labor. He wasn't forgiven, wasn't redeemed, but he was learning what it meant to earn a paycheck, to be treated like everyone else, to understand that dignity wasn't given by wealth, but built through respect. His father had disowned him, his friends had disappeared, but for the first time in his life, Trent felt like he was becoming someone worth being. At lunch break, he sat with the crew. They didn't know who he was, who he'd been. They just knew him as the new guy, the one who was learning. And that was enough. Across town, in a small house filled with elderly laughter, Dorothy served coffee to people who'd spent their lives being invisible. And in a garage on the edge of Mercer Falls, Jax rebuilt motorcycles and answered calls from people who needed someone to stand with them. The story could have ended with coffee on the floor, with silence and shame and nothing changing. But it didn't, because one person stood up and another found her voice. And together they proved that the most powerful thing in the world isn't wealth or status. It's truth, spoken, shared, amplified. The reckoning had come to Mercer Falls, and it was spreading, one voice at a time.